Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Harcourt, and I'm excited to have a conversation today with Elle Bradley, and we're going to talk all about conscious living. Elle is a psychotherapist, she's a spiritual teacher. So, in her psychotherapy work, she's really doing one on one with individuals. She does Skype coaching, really helping the individual to get better at overthinking things. As a spiritual teacher, Elle just loves to talk and speak on conscious living. And she actually has her Skype channel as well, Elle Bradley. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks for agreeing to do this. This is great. This is great, Christian. I know that, we just met recently within the last year, and it's been so great. We met around our interest in consciousness, and then we Skyped and talked a little bit, got to know each other, and then we actually met up in person around our interest in conscious parenting. And now here we are doing this interview, and I'm just really, really happy to do this. I'm very excited to do this today. So
Really,
thanks.
it's really interesting how the universe works, right? I truly believe that we were brought together and being able to have this discussion and hopefully help
Absolutely.
people. It really is exciting, and so I'd love to get into some questions just to
Yeah.
understand a little bit more about what you do in your practice. And from a
Okay.
consciousness perspective, I mean, when you think about your private practice, what made
Yes.
you really decide to have a philosophy that's really focused on consciousness?
Okay. So that's a really big question. Um, so I've been in the field of therapy for a number of years now, and I've worked for a lot of organizations that practice a very traditional psychotherapeutic approach. And my experience in that has been that I've seen some people make some really great changes and learn some really great strategies. But I also ended up seeing this kind of revolving door pattern happening where even though people were learning great skills, they were actually changing the behavior that they wanted to change for a period of time. They were still coming back and they were still kind of falling back into that pattern of behavior very easily. And so I became very curious about this and very interested in it and decided that I needed to know why. So I decided to start to think about making changes in my own life, and I started practicing doing the very same thing. And I realized really quickly how easy it is to fall back into that pattern of automatic core beliefs and what I like to call the default setting, and just how hard it was to make changes. Even though I knew a lot of the skills and strategies, teaching them to clients, it was really, really difficult. And so I started to look at that in my own life. I started to personalize that a little bit and really started to look at a different approach to changing behaviors, changing patterns. So I always had a spiritual undertone in my practice, but I really started to pay attention more spiritually, and I started to learn a lot of spiritual concepts, and I started to apply them to my own life, and in particular, present moment awareness, which is being present, which most people today traditionally would think of as mindfulness. And I really noticed that doing that, I was able to break those patterns a lot more. So I started to apply them in my practice as well. And what I noticed was that a lot of people were able to make an internal shift much, much differently than they were doing with some of the strategies around some of the traditional paradigms, which is, really what I learned from that mostly was that their recovery, you could say, or their ability to change that behavior was only as good as where they were emotionally. How, so for example, if they were super anxious or they got really depressed or something happened, it would be so easy to fall back into that automatic pattern of behavior. So I started to look at that as, that's kind of really recovery. Recovery to me is a lifelong process. There's some great strategies you can apply, but you need to keep applying them in order to maintain those changes. And the other way, once I started to apply the present moment awareness with clients, the internal shift that they made was so great. So no longer were they kind of scrambling on the outside to say, okay, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, they were going to stop drinking alcohol. So instead of going, I'm not going to go to parties, I'm not going to drive by the liquor store, I'm not going to talk to, any friends that drink. They made that shift internally where they realized that they had the resources within themselves. And the most interesting thing that happened out of that shift that I've seen happen so many times in people is that they were no longer a vibrational match to that behavior. So they would no longer even have the desire for that behavior. So it wasn't kind of this, white knuckling approach almost, where it was like, if I just stay, in a good zone emotionally, I can continue this behavior. I can hold on to not engaging in this behavior. It was more like they didn't even have the desire. They didn't even want to go there. They weren't a match to it anymore. And that was the turning point for me, is watching people start to go into that, away from that recovery paradigm and into that healing paradigm. And so there's a long continuum of healing, but at least getting in the direction of that.
Wow. Wow. And absolutely, because you need to actually feel it and do it yourself as well, because then you're more in their shoes.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more, Elle, when you start to talk about the vibrations, because I think that's a good point to maybe talk about in a little bit more detail.
Sure.
Talk a little bit more about what that means to actually shift your vibrations and how it really impacts everything around you.
Right, yeah. So vibrations meaning kind of your energy and your vibrational, sort of your emotional energy as well. So
Yes.
that the more you can think thoughts that feel better, the better your vibration will be, the better your vibrational frequency will be, which means essentially that you'll be in line with things that feel the same as that. So
Yeah.
let's say you went from feeling angry to feeling content. You would be more of a vibrational match to things happening in your reality that made you feel content rather than feeling angry. So what would happen essentially with the example before is the alcohol use to that degree would not match the
Yeah.
lifestyle or the frequency that person was at now. They wouldn't want that feeling because
Yeah.
they had gone to a new vibration.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So talk a little bit more, because with you practicing it, some of the things what did you find challenging? I know for myself, in terms of that vibration and the self-awareness piece,
Yeah.
what started to become very interesting as I got better and better at paying attention and stopping those reactive patterns when I was about to do one thing, taking a step
Yes.
back and then getting very curious and thinking, well, interesting, what's going on here? And not letting it escalate and not having those patterns that were automatically going to happen.
Yes.
Sometimes I would catch myself and it was very easy to shift the energy. Other times it's like that. Those emotions and energy really wanted to take me over and it was harder to shift it. So,
Yeah.
what did you find helped with that when you were starting to practice it?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I found that not only with myself, but also with clients. So everything I do with clients, I do with myself. And as you mentioned, that's sort of where it has to happen because you can only do with clients what you can do with yourself. So sometimes we can't skip from sad to happy. A lot of times we can't. Most times we can't skip from sad to happy because there's too big of a gap there. So what I did for myself in from my own experience was just to find a thought that was a little bit better. So if I was feeling sad, maybe I could feel, I could get to contentment. And then maybe I could get to even a little bit of, enjoyment. And then I could get a little bit happier, and then I could get a little bit more joyful. So just choosing emotions, just choosing to feel a little bit better step by step rather than kind of trying to jump over a big canyon, because that's very hard for people to do. And it's
Yeah.
easier to fall back. So often I tell people, well, how can you think about this just a little bit different that would make you feel just a little bit better, and let's just go there.
Yeah.
And that's more manageable for people, and plus it's more in sync and in line with how people make changes. So that's how I did it for me.
Yeah, I think that's being more realistic, not this whole all or nothing, right? It's baby steps.
Yes.
And as you get practice it more and more, I think that's the other piece. I remember Dr. Shafali actually mentioning it's like a
Yes.
muscle. It's like going to the gym. You need to really work that muscle. And the
Yeah.
more you start working that muscle, the more it starts to become ingrained and you just don't even
Yes.
have to think as much about it.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So you replace that with the other for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you talk about consciousness, I know for some people they might not know exactly what you mean about when you talk about consciousness. You definitely have gotten more
Yes.
into talking about present moment, but maybe a more overarching around what does consciousness and conscious living mean to you?
Okay. Yeah, for sure. So becoming conscious is really becoming aware. So becoming aware of these kind of automatic thoughts and behavioral patterns that we're talking about, and to just start recognizing where they're coming from and just looking at whether they really support your natural state of well-being, or whether they really support who you truly are, or even how you see yourself. So it's really kind of breaking out of the pattern and sort of waking up essentially, and looking at, the things that have been told to us from generation, generation, and generation. Do they really support how we are now? Do they really support how we want to be, or, how we came into this world? Or are they just things that we're repeating because they've happened in the past? Yeah. So becoming conscious to me is becoming aware, and
Yeah.
and then being able to recognize that that's the pattern that's happening. Yeah.
So, Elle, you and I are both very passionate about consciousness.
Yes.
To you, what do you think this means for why is it so important for the world? Why do we need more people waking up?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So it's important to become conscious because, we live in a planet that doesn't actually know itself. So I'm a firm believer that we're all having a separate experience of a united consciousness. And if we don't become conscious ourselves, we can contribute to the expansion and the evolution of that unified consciousness. So that unified consciousness might be what people call God. It might be collective conscious, whatever it is to you. If we're kind of living in this pattern of just, repeating automatic thoughts that we don't really pay attention to, it's kind of like living in a drone-like state. It's kind of like just feeling like you're kind of just going along with emotions, but there's not a whole lot of meaning attached to it. So waking up and becoming conscious, I think it is a spiritual responsibility for all of us to awaken and to, take on our own role of becoming conscious and becoming aware and making those changes so that we can help with the evolution of the planet, so that we can contribute to that expansion. Yeah. And so I'm kind of interested for you, Kristen, because I know that this is a big interest for you too. And I'm wondering, how did you fall into this whole category of consciousness and what's happening right now with everyone awakening on the planet?
That's a big question too, Elle. Yeah, I think for myself, where this kind of evolution and more of the spiritual journey started for me was almost 7 years ago when my daughter was born. And I really felt a huge shift becoming a mom and what motherhood meant for me. And I guess started to be conscious around, how our children can trigger us. And I started to really think about, well, is this about her or is this about me? And I started to feel like, no, this is intuitively I felt this is such a growth opportunity. This is a time for me to start to go inwards, to reflect and start to think about this whole parenting journey, and it started to really become my awakening. And I started to go out there and explore resources. And at the time, I didn't find a lot of resources that spoke specifically to parenting and experiencing this whole consciousness around parenting. And then eventually, the universe handed me Dr. Shafali on Oprah, and that
Nice.
brought me, and that brought me a little bit closer to a community that was really focusing on this concept of consciousness on the parenting side. And then with the work that I do day to day, I'm really talking with organizations and workplace and helping companies really humanizing the workplace, to really create organizations where people can do their best work, bring their best selves to work. My standpoint, one of the areas that needs to shift in order for that to happen is for leaders to also be more conscious, for them to take a more heart-centered approach. And so in my work, I love to really, talk to organizations about helping leaders to be more self-aware, to be more vulnerable, to be more transparent, to create environments where they are sharing and where they're also giving individuals permission to come to work and bring their whole selves to work, so that they are really set up for success, and it's really a place where they can thrive. So in terms of consciousness and awakening, I think it needs to happen everywhere, whether it's parents, whether that's workplaces, whether it's in our day-to-day lives and our personal lives. So it's interesting how it's all really come together, and I think that all started with the gift of my daughter being born 7 years ago.
Yes. Wow, that's fantastic. And there is a whole need for that, for people to understand how to bring consciousness into the workplace and how to bring it into their everyday life, and just to be able to incorporate that into what they're doing and not feel like it's something separate from their regular life. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's
Yes,
awesome.
it's not like this is me and then I go to work and this is another person. It's the same
Yeah,
person, right?
the
It's
same person, right?
right?
Yes. So we're really living a spiritual way with what we do in our regular life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. One of the other things I love to talk to you, Elle, about is, when we think about healing, how can
Mhm.
consciousness really contribute to our healing?
Yes, yeah. Consciousness is a great contributor to healing, because most of us don't recognize the fact that, when we've had things happen in the past, so we've had traumas, or we've had things happen that were so painful that we didn't experience them, they become sort of, we split that consciousness off from our consciousness itself. So it's, in actuality, we have fragments of ourself kind of hanging out in these traumas or these past unresolved issues. And consciousness can really help us heal, because when we become aware of that, then we can start to work on some processes to retrieve those aspects of ourself back to the present, and integrate them back to our whole self. So it helps contribute to that integration and that wholeness of who we truly are. So when we become conscious, we can actually begin that process, and we can actually start to heal. We can start to heal,
Yeah.
which is a huge aspect that's missing right now in our society, is what a lot of people don't realize, is that those parts of ourselves that are stuck in the past are constantly being repeated by being emotional triggers in our life. So
Yeah.
for example, let's say that, let's just make something up. Let's say that someone's dad, said that, called them stupid at 5 years old, and maybe never talked that way around them, and called them stupid out of a fit of anger, and said that, and that child really started to take that on from a felt perception, because a child can't, at that age, they don't have the conceptual ability to say, oh, daddy's really angry right now and he slipped up
Right.
by saying I'm stupid.
Yeah.
So they just take it on as an emotion, like I'm bad or something's wrong with me. And what most people don't realize is that every time they have that feeling again, whether it's in the disguise of a spouse or a child or a friend who says something similar that brings up that emotion, that they're reacting emotionally to that 5-year-old event.
Yeah.
And until they can go back to that 5-year-old event, re-experience it, maybe even change, the outcome of it, but go back and retrieve that part of themselves, they
Yeah.
will constantly repeat that triggering pattern. So becoming consciousness can help people heal by going back and doing that and bringing those parts of themselves home, and starting to be able to, let's say, calm down the nervous system reaction that happens as a result of that. So let's say that every time somebody said to that person, oh, that was a stupid thing to do, or that was dumb, and that person went back to that 5-year-old event, then they either have that fight, flight, or freeze
Mm-hmm.
survival instinct going on. And that's what's happening on an ongoing basis when that person is triggered by hearing that same thing or by having that same emotion. So by doing this and bringing this back and re-experiencing that, we can then start to calm down the nervous system, and with enough practice, even not have a nervous system reaction at all
Yeah.
to that particular trigger, which is
Yeah.
huge, which is a huge, huge healing paradigm. And there's so much more even to come after that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's that whole kind of saying nothing goes away until it's taught you what you need to learn. And sometimes you don't even realize, and it's just being kind to that inner child and being loving and understanding that a lot of times that reaction's not you now, it's that 5-year-old who didn't know how to react when that was happening. And
Absolutely.
it's incredible actually when you start to think about how
Right.
complex the brain and everything that's going on with your neurobiology and everything along those lines. One of the
Absolutely.
things you mentioned, Elle, which I'd love to get some more strategies around, is when you're thinking about being more conscious, like you talked about some of the more present, being, more present when things are happening. But what are some other strategies that individuals can really be using to get at that higher level of consciousness?
Okay, so for me personally, I really like present moment awareness, because I think that once people bring themselves back to the present, they get out of that, constant overthinking about what's going on, and making this situation even bigger than it is. So I really like to teach people to become present with themselves. And what that means is really being able to feel your body and being able to understand how it feels to make that shift from just thinking into the body, so that you recognize that you are being present. And so a lot of times I do that with myself, and I do that in practice. And it's really about feeling what you're doing, so that you're actually being and doing at the same time. So it's kind of like wanting to bring the fullness of who you are into things, so that when you're doing things, it's not just kind of this empty doing that feels like, oh, I did all this stuff today, but I don't feel like it made any difference, or there's no meaning behind it, or it kind of can feel just empty. So I like to teach present moment awareness because it allows people to bring themselves into what they're doing, as we talked about before, no matter what they're doing. So even
Yeah.
if they're just doing chores, or they're sending an email, or they're filing at work, or whatever it is, or even things that they enjoy, is to be able to have that interplay going of being and doing, so that you're part of the equation of your life. Um, so I like to use the example of, if you're just, because a lot of people can relate to, writing an email. So just if you're writing an email, instead of like, I gotta write 10 emails, and then just, put them aside, and you don't even kind of know what the process was or what you said, it's just kind of, write a few lines, and then come back and check in with yourself. And then write a few lines, and then come back and check in with yourself. Checking in with yourself could be feeling your body. It could be, looking at something on the wall and just studying it for a minute, or, just feeling yourself sitting in the chair. And the reason for that, again, is to bring yourself into what you're doing. And it brings a lot more enjoyment. It changes the vibrational frequency again of what you're doing, rather than, I just have to do this and I want to get this over with and I want to get into the next moment. So there again, we lose the here and the now. So I like to teach people in practice, and myself, how to get into their body, so they know what that shift feels like, and they can start incorporating that into their everyday routine. And the other one I really like is just to, deliberately create your reality. So a lot, because a lot of people, they walk out the door in the morning and they just like, well, I hope these things don't happen to me today. And we all like kind of set the mindset of what we don't want to happen today, rather than what we do want to happen.
Yeah.
And so another thing I like to teach is just to deliberately create your reality, even if it's just a half an hour at a time, or an
Mm-hmm.
hour at a time. And so, even like commuting to work or going to work is a good example. Just saying to yourself, well, this is how I want it to go. I want to get in the car. I want to put some relaxing music on. I want to notice the scenery around me when I drive. I want to feel the steering wheel on my hands. I just want to have a relaxed an easy drive. I want to feel good on the drive. I want to get to work on time and all of that, rather than kind of, oh, I hope I don't hit all the red lights. I hope nobody hits me. I mean, I hope that when I get to work, there's a parking spot. You know, we tend to go to that place of what we hope isn't happening. And so we kind of leave our reality up to chance.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's very empowering is to be able to deliberately create your reality. And for a lot of people that could be overwhelming. So that's why I like to say, let's just take the chunks. Let's just take just getting to work. And then when you get to work this, or when you go home that, and see how it feels. See how check in with yourself about how you're feeling when you take that, you know, control of your thoughts and control of your life that way. And what I find is that when people do that, they tend to start to feel like if something does come out of the blue, like let's say they are driving to work and somebody does start tailing them, or, you know, passes them and cuts in front of them, they handle it much differently because they're in that different state of mind. And that really is kind of what we're looking at, is getting into this, you know, if people want to call it mindfulness, but this mindful, or this state of mind into what we're doing. So we're not looking for an outcome with mindfulness. We're not looking, okay, we want to be mindful so we feel this. We just want to be that way in what we're doing.
Yeah. It's all about those intentions, just setting out those intentions for the day. And I love the way you're describing as well. It's really what I think of is that it's coming from that abundance mindset as opposed to that scarcity mindset, right? You're just going in there, this is how it's going to be. And it also makes me think of The Power of Now and Eckhart Tolle, which I really connect with. All of his is talking about that kind of stuff. It can have a huge impact, just creating that shift. And I like the way you describe the present moment, because it's true. When you can get into that, I actually enjoy washing the dishes now, because I get into that as I'm washing those dishes. I get into that space where I can feel that energy in my body. And it's such a small thing, but a huge thing when you make that shift. So I love that you're helping your clients to learn through that way, because it's life-changing. It really is.
Yeah, it's very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yes. And so that brings up something for me that I wanted to ask you, was when we're talking about, you know, strategies or even healing in the last, in the last bit, it's just, I noticed that you have a Facebook page. So it's called Be the Change. So if anybody's interested, Kristen Harcourt has a Facebook page called Be the Change, and it's about heart-centered living. And I'm really curious about, you know, for people who are watching this who might not, you know what that is. What does it mean to live from a heart, centered perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot what we discussed today. And one of the reasons why I specifically say be the change is because change always starts from within. So again, from this conscious living, we have to go inwards and do our work before it can have the shift in the world. So when I say be the change, it's all about transform your thoughts, transform your world, right? So by being so conscious and aware of your everyday interactions, it can have a huge impact. And I think part of the reason, even around the heart center, that I like to focus on as well is, a lot of us started off being very intuitive and very good at listening to that inner voice and making decisions from that place. And then over time, for various reasons and various conditioning, we stopped listening to that inner voice. It's always guiding us. It's really always there guiding us. And so through taking that heart-centered approach, you're getting better at listening to your heart and coming from that authentic, true place and owning it, because another big piece in terms of vulnerability and authenticity is being who you are and not caring what anybody else thinks. You know that you're coming from that true, genuine place, and you feel so much more alive and in touch with yourself when you're operating from that place.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really well said.
Oh, thank you.
Very good. Yeah, I love that. I love that.
So one of the last things I'd like to ask you, Elle, and we could talk for hours, but I know our audience has other stuff going on too, right? What are some of the things that you have coming up where people could learn about these strategies, some events that are going to be going on?
Right. Okay. Well, always on my YouTube channel. So, Elle Bradley channel is where you
Okay.
can find YouTube videos on any of these topics. And also, October 29th, this month,
Yeah.
I'm doing one of the seminars at a mindful parenting conference that's coming up
Okay.
in Durham region. So, for anybody who's in the Durham region or surrounding areas, Toronto or Markham or anything like that, it's a great conference. I spoke at this conference last year as well, and it's all kinds of strategies and goodies and ways to work with children mindfully, and lunch is included as well. And what I like about it is that, there's so many people connecting on this level around, conscious parenting and parenting from a mindful perspective. So there's lots of different perspectives to offer, and I know it was a great success last year. So if you want to come out to that, it's through local parents. So you would actually go on to localparent.ca/mindful parenting, and you can register for the conference there. And I have my own workshop coming up, an independent workshop, November 2nd. If for
Nice.
anybody who's in the Markham area or Toronto area, that's going to be held at the Old School House in Markham. And that is going to be on mindful parenting as well. So if you can't make one, you can maybe make the other. But definitely, there's always events coming up. Those are the next two that are coming up. So hopefully you'll come out for those and really support that cause. And also, it's such a, yourself, Kristen, I find that when people make the effort and come out and really hear about it's not traditional parenting, and I find that when they come away from it, and it's not parenting, it's parenting of any age. That's what I
Yeah.
really like to tell people. It's not just parenting young people, it's parenting your adult children too, 40, 50, 60, because it's about that deeper connection. And I
Yeah.
find when people go to these events, or like yourself with Dr. Shafali and myself, it really it transcends your relationship with your children and with yourself. And so I
Absolutely.
really, really encourage, not just because they're events that I'm doing, but I really encourage anybody to come out and learn. It really starts you on the road to consciousness in general, what we're talking about today.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, it's been so wonderful talking with you today. And
Yeah,
if anyone wants to connect with me, I'm all over social media. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram,
awesome.
LinkedIn under Kristen Harcourt. Would love to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun, and I'm so glad we did this today. This has
Me
been awesome,
too.
and I hope we do it again.
Yes.
Thank you so much.